Last Thursday, I came home from work early. My boss let me go at lunch after noticing how tired I looked. I figured I'd take advantage of the time and surprise my wife, Michelle, with some flowers. She's pregnant, our third child, and I thought a little romance might cheer her up. I pulled into the driveway and noticed a car parked on the street. It wasn't familiar, but our neighbors often have visitors, so I didn't think much of it. I walked up to the front door and immediately felt something was off. It was unlocked. Michelle never leaves the door unlocked, especially not when she's home alone. When I stepped inside, the house was too quiet. Usually, I'd hear music or the TV. But this time, there was nothing. I headed upstairs, holding the bouquet tightly in one hand. When I reached our bedroom, the door was closed. But through the small gap at the bottom, I saw two pairs of feet. One pair of Michelle's slippers and another, bare feet. My stomach dropped. I didn't want to believe what I was seeing. I stood there, frozen, listening to muffled voices. And then I heard her moan. Not just any moan. The kind of moan she used to make with me years ago before the kids, before life got in the way. My heart pounded as I heard a man's voice. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was intimate. And then Michelle said something that shattered me completely. "The baby's definitely yours. James hasn't touched me in months." I stumbled back, my hands shaking. I wanted to burst in there, to confront them, to scream and demand answers. But I couldn't move. I just stood there listening to them laugh. Actually laugh. I finally made it back downstairs and out to my car. I drove to an empty parking lot and threw up. I sat there for hours, trying to process what I'd just heard. The past few months flashed through my mind like a twisted slideshow. Michelle suddenly becoming overly protective of her phone. Her frequent prenatal yoga classes that always seemed to run late. Picking fights to avoid intimacy. Strange charges on our credit card. Hotels, restaurants I'd never been to. Her pregnancy announcement. She'd wrapped up the positive test like a gift, crying happy tears as she handed it to me. It was all an act. She'd been playing me for months. That night, I slept in my car. When I got home the next morning, Michelle acted like nothing was wrong. She smiled, kissed me on the cheek, and asked how work was. I felt like I was living in an alternate reality. I didn't confront her right away. I needed proof. I started going through her phone when she was in the shower. She'd recently changed her passcode, but she forgot to lock it one night. That's when I found the messages. Hundreds of them. From someone saved as yoga group. They weren't about yoga. Can't wait to see you tonight. I love feeling your belly when he kicks. James has no idea, does he? Faced with tears of joy, I screenshot everything and sent it to myself. The next day, I hired a private investigator. I wanted every detail, every photo, every receipt. If I was going to confront her, I needed to be armed with the truth. For the next week, I acted like everything was normal. I went to work, helped with the kids, and even painted the nursery at Michelle's request, all while knowing she was sneaking off to be with him. The PI worked quickly. Within days, I had photos of them together, at a hotel, at a restaurant, at his house, and then the bombshell. He wasn't just anyone. He was someone I knew. By the time the private investigator handed me the report, I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. The man Michelle was seeing wasn't just some random stranger. It was Peter. Peter, the guy who had been over for dinner countless times. Peter, who had helped me fix our garage door last spring. Peter, our next-door neighbor. I stared at the photos in disbelief. There was Michelle, smiling and laughing with Peter at a cozy Italian restaurant, holding hands in the parking lot of a hotel, kissing him on the front porch of his house while his wife and kids were out of town. The betrayal cut deeper than I thought possible. Not only was Michelle cheating on me, but she was doing it with someone I considered a friend. That evening, I sat at the dinner table with Michelle and our kids, pretending everything was fine. She was her usual self, laughing and joking with the kids, rubbing her pregnant belly like she was the picture-perfect wife and mother. But I saw through it now. After dinner, I decided to test her. "So, how's yoga going?" I asked casually. She froze for a split second before smiling. "Good," she said. "We're doing a lot of breathing exercises lately. It's really helping with the pregnancy stress." I nodded, pretending to believe her. "Maybe I'll come with you sometime," I said. Her smile faltered. "Oh, I don't think you'd enjoy it," she said quickly. "It's really more of a women's thing." Another lie. Later that night, while Michelle was in the shower, I checked her phone again. She'd been messaging Peter nonstop. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow." James was asking about yoga again. Face with rolling eyes. "The baby's kicking so much today. He must know his daddy's coming to visit." I clenched my fists, my blood boiling. She wasn't just cheating on me, she was mocking me. The next day, I met with the private investigator again. "I need more," I said. "Something that will leave no doubt." He nodded. "I'll follow them tonight," he said. "She's meeting him again, isn't she?" "She always does," I said bitterly. That evening, Michelle left the house around 6 p.m., claiming she had a prenatal yoga class. I watched her drive off, my stomach churning. The PI called me 2 hours later. "They're at the park," he said. "The one by the lake." I drove there, parking a block away, so she wouldn't see me. When I got to the park, I saw them immediately. Michelle and Peter were sitting on a bench, holding hands. She was leaning against him, her pregnant belly prominently visible. I snapped a few photos with my phone, my hands shaking. As I got closer, I could hear their conversation. "I can't wait until it's just us," Peter was saying. Michelle smiled. "Me too," she said. "Once the baby's born, everything will fall into place." "And James?" Peter asked. She rolled her eyes. "He'll believe whatever I tell him. He always does." My chest tightened, my anger boiling over. I wanted to confront them right then and there, but I stopped myself. I wasn't ready yet. The next morning, Michelle acted like everything was normal. She kissed me on the cheek, thanked me for fixing the nursery shelves, and made me breakfast. It was all an act, and I hated her for it. I decided to test her again. "Do you want to go to the park this weekend?" I asked casually. "The one by the lake?" She hesitated, then smiled. "Sure," she said. "That sounds nice." Another lie. That afternoon, I met with a lawyer. I showed him the photos, the texts, and the PI's report. "This is solid evidence," he said. "You have a strong case for divorce. But timing is important. We need to act before the baby is born." I nodded, my mind racing. "Can we also file for custody of our other kids?" I asked. "Absolutely," he said. "With this evidence, the court will be on your side." That night, I started making a list of everything I needed to do. Secure our finances. Gather more evidence. Prepare the kids for what's coming. Confront Michelle at the right moment. The hardest part was pretending everything was normal. Michelle had no idea what was coming. Over the next few days, the PI gathered even more evidence. Photos of Michelle and Peter at his house. Receipts for baby clothes purchased with our joint account. A hotel reservation under her name. And then the bombshell. Michelle wasn't just cheating on me with Peter. There was someone else. When the private investigator called me the next morning, his tone told me everything I needed to know before he even spoke. "James," he said, hesitating slightly, "there's something you need to see." "What now?" I asked, my stomach sinking. "I followed Michelle again last night," he said. "She wasn't just with Peter. There's someone else." I felt the room spin around me. "What do you mean, someone else?" I asked, gripping the phone tightly. "I mean, she's seeing another man," he said. "I've got photos and video. You need to come to the office." When I arrived, he handed me an envelope. Inside were photos of Michelle sitting in a car with a man I didn't recognize. They weren't just talking. They were kissing. She met him at a coffee shop, the PI explained. They talked for about an hour, then went back to his car. Spent another half hour there before she left. "Who is he?" I asked, my voice shaking. "I'm still working on that," he said. I stared at the photos, my heart pounding. Michelle wasn't just cheating on me with Peter. She was juggling two affairs. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing. How long had this been going on? How many lies had she told? That evening, I tried to act normal, but it was getting harder to keep up the facade. Michelle was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, when I walked in. "Hey," she said, looking up with a smile. "How was your day?" "Fine," I said shortly. She frowned. "Is everything okay?" "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "Just tired." I sat down next to her, watching her out of the corner of my eye. She looked so calm, so confident, like she had nothing to hide. It made my blood boil. The next day, the PI called with more information about the second man. "His name is Michael," he said. "Works at the hospital. He's a nurse in the maternity ward. I felt my stomach drop. Michelle had mentioned him before, casually in passing. Michael said I should drink more water, she told me once after a prenatal appointment. At the time, I didn't think anything of it. Now it felt like another knife to the chest. The PI handed me more photos. Michelle and Michael walking out of the hospital together, laughing. Michelle leaning against his car, her pregnant belly prominent, while he kissed her forehead. Michelle sitting on a park bench with him, her hand on his. This just keeps getting worse, I muttered, shaking my head. The PI nodded sympathetically. What do you want to do next? I need more, I said. Everything. I want to make sure she has no way to deny this. Over the next week, the PI gathered even more evidence. Michelle was still seeing Peter, but now she was also spending time with Michael. She alternated between the two, lying to me about yoga classes, doctor's appointments, and girls' nights. One evening, I decided to confront her, just to see how far she'd go to cover her tracks. Hey, I said casually as we were getting ready for bed. How was yoga tonight? It was great, she said, smiling as she climbed into bed. We did this new flow that's supposed to be really good for back pain. I nodded, pretending to believe her. But inside, I was seething. The next morning, I checked her phone while she was in the shower. The messages were there, as always. From Peter, can't wait to see you later. The baby's so lucky to have you as a mom. From Michael, counting down the hours until I can hold you again. I took screenshots of everything and sent them to my email. Then I called the lawyer. We need to move quickly, I said. This is worse than I thought. He agreed. With the evidence you have, we can file for divorce and secure custody of your kids. But we need to time this perfectly. That evening, Michelle was glowing as she showed me nursery paint samples. I want everything to be perfect for our little miracle, she said, rubbing her belly. I forced a smile, nodding as she held up a swatch of pale blue. Inside, I felt like I was going to explode. The next day, the PI called with another bombshell. James, he said, his voice tense. There's a third man. I froze, the phone slipping slightly in my hand. A third? I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. Yes, he said. I caught her meeting him yesterday. They were at a hotel. My mind reeled. Michelle wasn't just cheating. She was leading a double life. Or maybe even a triple life. When the PI called with news of a third man, I thought he had to be mistaken. Are you sure? I asked, gripping the phone tightly. Yes, he said firmly. Her patterns are consistent. She met this man at a hotel yesterday. I've got photos and video. I exhaled sharply, feeling my chest tighten. Send me everything, I said. An hour later, I was sitting at my desk, staring at the photos the PI had emailed me. There she was, Michelle, walking into a mid-range hotel with a man I didn't recognize. He was younger than Peter and Michael, maybe in his early 30s, with dark hair and an athletic build. They weren't just walking together. He had his arm around her, and she was leaning into him like a love-struck teenager. The video was even worse. They were in the hotel lobby, laughing and flirting like they didn't have a care in the world. At one point, she reached up to touch his face, and he kissed her on the forehead. I felt sick. This wasn't a marriage anymore. This was a circus, and I was the clown. That evening, Michelle came home with takeout. I figured you deserved a night off from cooking, she said, placing the bags on the counter with a smile. I stared at her, struggling to keep my expression neutral. Thanks, I said, my voice tight. She didn't notice or didn't care. As we ate dinner, she chatted about random things. A new show she'd started watching, how the kids were doing in school, and her plans to nest in the nursery over the weekend. I nodded along, barely listening. The third man changed everything. Later that night, I called the PI again. Who is he? I asked. I'm still working on that, he said. But I can tell you this, he's not local. He drove in from out of town to meet her. Out of town. How far did her lies extend? The next day, the PI emailed me an update. The third man's name was Ryan. He worked as a personal trainer in a city about an hour away. And here's the kicker. Michelle met him at a fitness expo 6 months ago, right around the time she announced her pregnancy. I stared at the email, my heart pounding. 6 months ago. Was Ryan the father? I spent the rest of the day in a daze, barely able to focus on anything. The thought of Michelle carrying another man's baby while stringing me along made my stomach churn. That evening, she asked me to help her organize the nursery. "I can't believe we're doing this again," she said, smiling as she folded tiny onesies. "It feels like just yesterday we were getting ready for Michael," she added, referring to our youngest. I nodded, my mind racing. The PI had told me something else during our call. Michelle had opened a secret bank account. There were multiple transfers from our joint account totaling over $20,000. And some of that money had been sent to Ryan. I clenched my fists, struggling to keep my emotions in check. Michelle didn't just betray me emotionally. She was draining our finances to fund her double or triple life. The next morning, I met with the lawyer again. "We've got more evidence," I said, handing him the latest report from the PI. He skimmed through it, his expression grim. "This is solid," he said. "We can move forward with the divorce. But we need to act before the baby is born. Otherwise, you'll be legally presumed to be the father." I nodded, my mind made up. "It's time," I said. That evening, I decided to test Michelle one last time. "Hey," I said casually as we sat down for dinner. "Do you have another yoga retreat coming up?" She hesitated for a fraction of a second before nodding. "Yeah," she said. "Why?" "Just curious," I said, forcing a smile. "You've been so dedicated to it lately." She smiled back, looking relieved. "Thanks for noticing," she said. "It's really helping with the pregnancy stress." Lie after lie after lie. The PI called me again the next day with another update. Michelle had booked a hotel room for the weekend. The reservation was under her maiden name, and she'd listed Ryan as the second guest. That was the final straw. The next morning, I packed a bag and left the house before Michelle woke up. I checked into a motel on the other side of town, needing space to think. As I sat on the bed, staring at the ceiling, a realization hit me. This wasn't just about the affairs. This was about control. Michelle had manipulated me, lied to me, and used me for her own gain. But she didn't realize one thing. I wasn't going to let her win. I didn't sleep much the night I left the house. My mind was racing, filled with images of Michelle laughing with Peter, flirting with Michael, and kissing Ryan. Every memory felt like a dagger, twisting deeper with every beat of my heart. But I wasn't going to let her break me. The next morning, I met with the lawyer again. "I want everything ready," I said. "Divorce papers, custody filings, everything." He nodded. "We're almost there. With the evidence you've provided, you have a solid case. But you need to decide how you want to approach the confrontation." I thought about that for a long time. Part of me wanted to burst into the house, throw the photos and messages in Michelle's face, and demand answers. But another part of me, the calmer, more strategic part, knew that wouldn't accomplish anything. If I wanted to protect myself and my kids, I had to be smart. I spent the next few days laying the groundwork. The lawyer helped me secure our joint accounts so Michelle couldn't withdraw any more money. The private investigator compiled a final report, including photos, videos, and financial records. And I arranged for my sister to take the kids for the weekend. When the weekend arrived, I told Michelle I had a work conference and wouldn't be back until Sunday night. She didn't seem suspicious. "Have fun," she said, kissing me on the cheek. "The kids and I will be fine." Another lie. Once I was sure she thought I was gone, I called the private investigator. "She's meeting Ryan tonight," he confirmed. "Same hotel as last time." I clenched my jaw, my anger bubbling just below the surface. "Keep following her," I said. "I'll be there soon." I arrived at the hotel an hour later, parking a few blocks away so she wouldn't see me. The PI was waiting in the lobby, his expression serious. "They're in room 217, he said. I took the elevator up, my hands shaking with a mix of anger and adrenaline. When I reached the door, I hesitated for a moment, listening to the muffled voices inside. Then I knocked. The voices stopped abruptly. A few seconds later, the door opened a crack, and Ryan's face appeared. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone cautious. "You can get the hell out of my way," I snapped, shoving the door open and stepping inside. Michelle was sitting on the bed, her face pale. "James," she said, her voice trembling. "What are you doing here?" "What am I doing here?" I repeated bitterly. "What the hell are you doing here, Michelle?" Ryan stepped forward, trying to play the tough guy. "Look, man, I think you should leave," he said. I turned to him, my fists clenched. "This isn't your fight, Ryan. Stay out of it." He backed off, his confidence evaporating. I turned back to Michelle, my chest tight with anger and betrayal. Do you have any idea what you've done? I asked, my voice shaking. Do you have any idea how much you've destroyed? She opened her mouth to respond, but I held up a hand, cutting her off. Don't, I said. Don't even try to lie. I know everything, Michelle. Peter, Michael, Ryan. All of it. Her face crumpled, and she started to cry. I'm sorry, she sobbed. I didn't mean for it to get this far. Didn't mean for it to get this far? I repeated, my voice rising. You're pregnant, Michelle. Whose baby is it? Peter's? Michael's? Ryan's? She didn't answer. The silence was deafening. I turned to Ryan, who was hovering near the door, looking like he wanted to be anywhere but there. Is it yours? I demanded. He shook his head quickly. I don't know, he said. I laughed bitterly, running a hand through my hair. This is unbelievable, I muttered. Michelle finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry, she said again. I was scared. I didn't know how to stop. I stared at her, my chest tight with a mix of anger and heartbreak. You've destroyed our family, I said softly. You've destroyed everything. I walked out without another word, slamming the door behind me. The next day, I met with the lawyer again, finalizing the divorce papers and custody filings. It's time to end this, I said. That evening, I picked up the kids from my sister's house, determined to shield them from the fallout as much as possible. When we got home, Michelle was sitting on the couch, her face pale and drawn. James, she said, standing up as we walked in. Not now, I said sharply. She flinched but didn't say anything else. Over the next few days, I focused on the kids, trying to maintain some sense of normalcy for them. Michelle stayed in the guest room, avoiding me as much as possible. But the confrontation wasn't over. Not yet. The days after confronting Michelle and Ryan were a blur. I focused on the kids, keeping their routine as stable as possible, while Michelle stayed in the guest room, avoiding me like the plague. Every time I looked at her, I felt a mix of anger and heartbreak. The divorce papers were ready, the custody filings secured, and the PI's evidence was organized into a neat little folder that I kept in my desk drawer. But there was still one loose end. Michelle hadn't come clean about who the father of her baby was. That Friday, I came home to find her sitting at the kitchen table, looking more composed than I'd seen her in weeks. We need to talk, she said, her voice steady. I sighed, setting my keys on the counter. Finally ready to tell the truth? She flinched but didn't respond right away. I know I've hurt you, she said softly. I know I've done terrible things, and I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't fix this, I said, my voice cold. You lied, cheated, and destroyed our family. You used my love for you and the kids as a cover for your affairs. How do you even begin to apologize for that? She wiped at her eyes, but no tears fell. I'm ready to tell you everything, she said finally. I sat across from her, folding my arms. Then start talking. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly. It started with Peter, she admitted. A few months after Michael was born, I felt disconnected. You were working late a lot, and I was overwhelmed. Peter was there. My jaw tightened, but I didn't interrupt. Then I met Michael during one of my prenatal appointments, she continued. He was kind, attentive, and, I don't know, I felt seen. I let out a bitter laugh. Seen? Seriously? She flinched but pressed on. And then Ryan, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. We met at a fitness expo. It wasn't supposed to mean anything, but here we are. I finished for her. She nodded, looking down at her hands. I don't know whose baby it is, she admitted. Her words hit me like a sledgehammer, even though I'd been expecting them. You don't know, I repeated bitterly. Do you realize how insane that sounds? You're pregnant, Michelle. That's not something you can brush off. I know, she said, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. I know I've messed everything up, but I want to fix it, James. I want to fix us. I stared at her in disbelief. Fix us? I said, my voice rising. There is no us, Michelle. Not anymore. You made sure of that. She started sobbing, but I didn't feel any sympathy. This wasn't just about the affairs. This was about the lies, the manipulation, and the complete disregard for our marriage and family. "James, please," she said, reaching for my hand. "I love you. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." I pulled my hand away. Standing up, "It's too late for that," I said. The next day I called a family meeting. I didn't want to involve the kids more than necessary, but they needed to know what was happening. "Mom and I are getting a divorce," I said, keeping my tone as calm as possible. Michael, our youngest, looked confused. "Why?" he asked. "It's complicated," I said, "but just know that we both love you very much." Emily, our oldest, looked at Michelle with narrowed eyes. "Is it because of her?" she asked bluntly. Michelle's face went pale. "That's not fair," she said, her voice trembling. "Neither is what you've done," Emily shot back, standing up and leaving the room. That evening, Michelle cornered me in the hallway. "Do you have to turn the kids against me?" she demanded. "I didn't turn them against you," I said coldly. "You did that all by yourself." The final confrontation came on Sunday. Michelle was meeting Ryan again, this time at a coffee shop across town. The PI had given me a heads up, and I decided it was time to put an end to this charade once and for all. I walked into the coffee shop, my heart pounding. Michelle was sitting at a corner table with Ryan, her hand resting on her belly as they laughed about something. They didn't see me until I was standing right in front of them. "James," Michelle said, her face going pale. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," I said, my voice cold. Ryan stood up, his expression cautious. "Look, man, I think we should talk about this." "You've done enough talking," I snapped, cutting him off. I turned to Michelle, my anger bubbling over. "This ends now," I said. "I've filed for divorce. The papers will be served tomorrow. And as for the baby, we're getting a paternity test. I'm not raising someone else's child." Her jaw dropped, but no words came out. I turned to leave, but Ryan grabbed my arm. "Hey," he said, trying to sound tough. "You don't need to be an ass about this." I yanked my arm away, glaring at him. "You have no idea what I've been through," I said. "So, do yourself a favor and stay out of my way." As I walked out of the coffee shop, I felt a strange sense of relief. The lies, the manipulation, the betrayal, it was all out in the open now. Michelle would face the consequences of her actions, and I could finally start rebuilding my life.